Good day, Mr. NDE narrator. My name is Rachel Monroe. I'm 41 years old and live in Greenville, South Carolina. Before the morning of March 7th, 2024, I considered myself a Christian, but not one you'd call deeply spiritual or committed. I believed in God and knew He existed. I even went to church on holidays or whenever I felt guilty about something. But truthfully, my relationship with God was weak. I prayed only when I needed help or when life was hard. I rarely read the Bible. I saw prayer as something I did to feel better, not something that really worked. Looking back now, I realize I was just going through the motions. I thought being a decent person was enough. I didn't feel close to God or think deeply about spiritual things. I didn't doubt God's existence, but I didn't truly live like I trusted Him either. I thought I understood prayer. I had no idea how wrong I was. That Thursday morning began like any other. I got up before sunrise, made a cup of coffee, and packed my work bag. I was running a few minutes late, which wasn't unusual. I worked as a respiratory therapist at Greenville General Hospital. I loved my job and the patients I helped, especially in the pediatric unit. There was one little boy named Jonas who had been on my mind. He'd been admitted again because of a severe asthma attack, and I remember silently hoping he'd have a better day. As I got into my car, I turned on some soft worship music. The roads were quiet, and the sun was just beginning to rise, spreading a golden hue over everything. My coffee sat in the cup holder as I mentally planned my shift. I remember being tired, but calm. I wasn't thinking about anything deep, just about work, errands, and the weekend. Life felt ordinary, safe, unchanging. I had been driving for about 10 minutes when it happened. I was heading down the main highway toward the hospital, with no warning signs and no time to react. I didn't see the truck until it was too late. Later, I was told the driver had fallen asleep at the wheel after working 2 long shifts in a row. His truck veered across the center line and crashed straight into the front of my car. It happened so fast that I didn't even have time to scream. I didn't feel the impact in the way you'd expect. One moment I was looking at the road. The next moment, there was a blinding white light and a strange pulling sensation. Then everything went quiet. No pain, no fear, just silence and stillness. The paramedics said I was without a heartbeat for 7 minutes and 39 seconds. During that time, something far beyond this world began to unfold. I wasn't aware of my broken body. I wasn't trapped or confused. Instead, I felt like I was being lifted out of everything I had ever known. It wasn't like floating in the sky, and it didn't feel like a dream either. I just felt like I was being carried, not by hands, but by something peaceful and strong. I could no longer see the wreck, the road, or the chaos that must have been happening below. I was leaving it all behind. I had no thoughts of regret or worry. Everything that had once felt important, deadlines, bills, unfinished tasks, was completely gone from my mind. It felt like I had stepped outside of time. I couldn't feel my body, yet I felt more alive than ever. It was like my soul had become free, weightless, and unburdened by all the things that usually hold us down in daily life. As I moved into this new space, I noticed the atmosphere felt different, but something more complete, more alive. It wasn't cold or hot. It wasn't dark or blinding. Everything glowed gently, as if lit from within. It didn't feel like a room or a sky. It felt like I was inside a living presence. The closest way I can describe it is that I was surrounded by love, but not human love. This love was pure, unconditional, endless. It wrapped around me without words or touch. There were no voices, yet I felt like I was being understood deeply, beyond anything I'd ever experienced. I didn't feel judged or afraid. I felt fully known and completely accepted. For the first time in my life, I felt like I belonged somewhere completely. I was at peace, a kind of peace that didn't depend on anything going right. The place itself didn't look like anything I'd seen in pictures or movies about heaven. There were no golden streets or white robes. It was more like being in a sea of living light. Every part of it seemed to breathe and shimmer. I felt like I was standing inside something eternal. Colors shifted softly in ways I can't describe with earth words. They weren't just colors. They were feelings that were gentle, comforting, beautiful. And the silence wasn't empty. It was full, like music you could feel in your heart. I didn't feel alone, even though I didn't see anyone right away. It was like everything around me knew me, and I was safe there. I didn't even want to ask questions. I didn't need to understand it with my mind. My soul understood it. I had never experienced anything so real. That's when I began to feel the presence of someone coming closer. Not walking, not flying, just suddenly there. It wasn't a person like you and me, but more like a being made entirely of light. This being didn't speak with a voice, but I could hear it clearly inside my thoughts. I didn't feel fear, only awe and a quiet sense of trust. I didn't know who this being was, but I felt like it knew me better than I knew myself. Its presence was strong but gentle, powerful yet calm. I felt like a child standing before someone wise and kind. Even without words, I knew this being was there to help me, not to harm me. I didn't realize it yet, but I was about to be shown something that would change everything I believed about life, about prayer, and about reality itself. The peace I felt in that moment went far beyond anything I had ever known on earth. It was not just the absence of worry, it was the presence of something holy and whole. I had no pain, no fear, no questions, just peace. It wasn't a feeling that came and went. It was like breathing in truth, like being wrapped in love so deep and wide that it didn't need to be explained. I didn't want to go back. I didn't think about my body, my job, or even my family at that moment. Not because I didn't love them, but because I was completely held. Everything in that place felt like it was exactly as it should be. Nothing missing. Nothing broken. I thought, if this is what death is, then why are we so afraid of it? But as I would soon learn, this wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something greater. That peace I felt was not just a resting place. It was preparation. I didn't know it, but I had been brought there for a reason. I was about to be shown something few people ever see. What I was about to learn would not only bring meaning to my life, but give purpose to my survival. I had left behind the ordinary world of alarms and traffic and responsibilities. Now I was in a realm of light and truth, where every second felt full of understanding. I didn't need to be convinced that this was real. It was more real than anything I had known. And in that reality, I began to sense that I was not just a visitor, but a student. Something was being prepared for me. Something that would change not only how I viewed prayer, but how I understood the very nature of life and creation itself. The light shifted, and suddenly I could sense a being near me. This being wasn't human. It didn't have a body like ours, yet it had form made of light and presence. There were no wings, no robes, no halo. But the moment it arrived, I felt an overwhelming sense of calm, reverence, and knowing. Without hearing anything out loud, I heard it speak inside me. The words weren't spoken through ears, but arrived directly into my thoughts like a melody I'd always known, but forgotten. "You have been brought here to see, to understand, and to remember," the voice said. The being introduced itself as Gabriel, not in a dramatic way, but like someone reminding me of something I had always known deep down. I didn't ask questions. I didn't need to. My heart already trusted him. Gabriel didn't come with grand announcements or blinding light. His presence was firm but comforting. He didn't look like the angels I had read about in books or heard about in church sermons. He was made entirely of light, constantly moving, yet completely still at the same time. I couldn't see a face, yet I felt seen. I couldn't hear a tone, yet I knew every word was filled with wisdom. Standing near Gabriel felt like standing next to truth itself. His presence didn't just calm me, it made me feel awake in a way I'd never felt before. There was no room for doubt, pride, or confusion. All I felt was trust and peace. I sensed that he wasn't there to impress me, but to guide me. And I wasn't in that realm by accident. I had been invited not because I earned it, but because I was ready to understand something I never could while alive. Gabriel told me I was in what he called a space between spaces. He said it wasn't heaven and it wasn't earth. It was a place of insight, where souls were sometimes shown the deeper workings of creation. Here you will not just observe, he said. You will understand. As he said that, it was as if my awareness grew wider. I could feel more than just what was in front of me. I could feel layers of reality, like curtains being pulled back one by one. Nothing in that realm was hidden or disguised. Everything was honest and clear, yet there was no fear in seeing it all. This space was filled with truth, but the truth didn't hurt. It healed. It was like being washed in understanding, where even your worst memories were seen in light, not shame. Gabriel was not just guiding me through a place. He was guiding me through revelation. I remember asking why I was chosen to see this. Because your understanding must grow, Gabriel answered gently. And through you, others will understand as well. I didn't feel proud or special. I felt humbled, like a student in a sacred classroom. The light around us began to shift and move as if responding to what he was saying. I realized that in this realm, everything had life and purpose. Light itself was alive. Even silence carried knowledge. The space we stood in wasn't still like a picture. It moved gently, like it breathed. Every motion seemed to come from intention, like the universe was whispering secrets all around me. Yet I didn't feel overwhelmed. In fact, I had never felt so steady. I understood that what I was about to be shown would not just change me, but would affect how I lived if I returned to the world below. Gabriel didn't lead me by hand or voice. Instead, it felt like we moved by intention. The moment he directed my attention somewhere, we were already there. We began to travel not across distances, but across understanding. It was like gliding through layers of reality. I wasn't seeing scenery like on Earth. I was experiencing patterns, energy, connections. I could feel the movement of life itself, the way thoughts, prayers, and choices affected the world. It was all part of a living design. I saw that everything was connected, not just people, but moments, emotions, and even words. I felt that love and truth held it all together. There was no need to rush or explain. Gabriel's presence made every moment feel full and complete. I didn't feel like I was learning something new. It felt more like remembering something I had always known, but had forgotten while living in the noise and distraction of Earth. As we continued, I noticed something that filled me with awe. The space around us was not just glowing with light, it was made of light. But this wasn't just a physical glow. It was conscious light. It carried knowledge, memory, and presence. When I focused on a certain area, it responded, as if the light itself was aware and alive. I understood that this realm was a bridge between the physical and the eternal. It was where things became clear, where the soul could see without filters. My earthly mind would have called this impossible. But in that place, nothing felt impossible. I wasn't dreaming, and I wasn't imagining. I was experiencing. I felt no weight in my body, no pull of gravity, no hunger or pain. I felt like I was only spirit, awake, alert, and filled with wonder. It was the most natural I had ever felt, even though nothing was familiar. Gabriel was always near, never rushed, never forcing anything. He allowed space for silence, for absorption. I could tell he understood my thoughts even before I formed them. There was no need for small talk or explanations. Every time I wondered about something, the answer arrived like a wave of light passing through me. I didn't need to search for meaning. Meaning came to me. The more I stood in this space, the more I realized how loud and disconnected my life had been. On Earth, everything had felt urgent, chaotic, full of pressure. But here, everything was gentle, ordered, and deeply meaningful. There was no pressure to perform, no fear of failure. The only thing I felt was curiosity and reverence. This was not a place of punishment or reward. It was a place of preparation and awakening. And I knew that what I was about to learn would go beyond anything I had believed before. What struck me most wasn't just how different this realm was from Earth. It was how real it felt. I had always assumed heaven would be vague or dreamlike, but this space between was more solid in meaning than anything I had experienced on Earth. Back in my daily life, things often felt rushed and thin, like I was always running but never arriving. But here, every second was full. Every thought mattered. Every feeling carried truth. It was impossible to lie in this place, not because someone would stop you, but because truth was the natural state. Even my own soul felt more visible, more known. I could feel who I really was, not the version people saw, but the me I barely understood. I was still me, but a clearer, brighter version. And I knew that I was being readied for something extraordinary, something that would explain why prayer is not just speaking, but shaping reality itself. As Gabriel guided me deeper into that realm, the light began to shift in a way that made it feel like we were entering another layer of understanding. This space felt more focused, more detailed. It wasn't filled with the same calm motion as before. It was vibrant, active, alive with movement and purpose. Then, without walking or crossing any boundary, we arrived at a place Gabriel called the Cosmic Control Room. It didn't look like a room with walls or screens. Instead, it was an enormous expanse of light, filled with flowing streams that twisted, glowed, and pulsed in every direction. These streams weren't random. They each had a rhythm, a pattern, a destination. I instinctively knew what I was looking at. These weren't just beams of energy. These were prayers. I mean real prayers moving through the fabric of existence. I could feel them, not just see them. Each one carried intention, emotion, and power. Some of the streams were bright and sharp, like laser beams shooting through the air. They had color and direction, and they moved with strong force. Others were softer, spreading outward like gentle ripples across water. They looked like waves of colored light, each one distinct. I noticed that not all of them looked the same. Some glowed gold, others blue, green, or purple. Some were steady, while others flickered or dimmed as they moved. Gabriel stood beside me and said, "These are the prayers of people, each one alive with intention. What you see is not symbolic. This is what prayer actually looks like in the unseen world." As I watched them flow, I could feel the emotions behind them. Some were filled with gratitude, others with desperation. Some came from love, a few came from selfishness or fear, but all of them had a form and a visible effect in this realm. Gabriel explained that each color and pattern reflected the nature of the prayer. He pointed to a golden ripple moving gently through the light and said, "That is a prayer of gratitude." It was beautiful, and it was radiating warmth and spreading outward, touching other light streams around it. Then he showed me a bright green pattern, shaped like an unfolding vine. "That is a prayer for healing," he said. It moved with purpose, reaching into something unseen, changing things at a deep level. I then saw deep purple lines stretching forward like paths being cleared in the darkness. "Those are prayers for guidance," Gabriel said. They made space for clarity and direction, helping others walk through confusion. I had never imagined prayer as anything more than words spoken in hope, but here I could see they were actual energy, living forces, that flowed into reality and shaped it. They were not being ignored. They were part of creation itself. Not all the streams were strong, some barely moved. A few dimmed out before they reached anywhere. I pointed to one and asked, "Why is that one so weak?" Gabriel answered, "That is a prayer spoken without faith. It lacks trust." It was said from fear, but not from belief. I realized then that the strength of a prayer wasn't just in the words, but in the heart behind them. When someone truly believed, their prayers burned bright, traveling far and making real change. When someone prayed as a routine, without meaning, their prayer became a flicker, struggling to rise. I also saw prayers that were tangled, mixed up in confusion or selfishness. They still moved, but slowly and with little effect. Gabriel explained, "Prayer must align with love and truth to carry full power. When it does, it becomes a tool of transformation. When it doesn't, it loses direction and force." The difference was clear in that space. Then Gabriel directed my attention to a cluster of powerful glowing streams weaving together into a single thick line. It pulsed with strength I could almost feel in my chest. "This," he said, "is collective prayer." I watched in amazement as multiple individual prayers, each glowing on its own. They were combined, synchronized, and formed something larger. Together they created what looked like a superhighway of spiritual energy. The effect was massive. Wherever that combined stream flowed, it created shifts like moving blocks, opening doors, changing direction. Gabriel told me, when people pray together with one heart, their prayers amplify. They resonate and strengthen one another. What one prayer cannot do alone, many can do together. I could see it happening. These united prayers were literally reshaping parts of reality. I watched a group praying for peace in a troubled place, and their united prayer energy reached into that region, influencing emotions, calming conflict, and softening the hearts of decision-makers. We stood there as he continued to teach me, and the streams of light kept flowing, wrapping around us, going out into places I couldn't see. Gabriel showed me how each prayer had a destination. No sincere prayer went unanswered. It always reached somewhere. Even if the outcome wasn't what the person expected, the prayer still had an effect. Prayer is never wasted, Gabriel said. It always enters the spiritual atmosphere and causes movement. I noticed that some of the strongest prayers came not from the richest or most educated people, but from people who were humble, desperate, or deeply full of love. A poor woman praying for her child lit up the control room with energy that felt like thunder. A group of strangers praying for someone they'd never met created streams that danced with gold and blue. I understood then that it wasn't the words that mattered. It was the heart, the sincerity, the selflessness. Then Gabriel allowed me to see how these streams interacted with the physical world. He showed me a doctor in a hospital room who suddenly remembered an old treatment he hadn't thought about in years, and I saw the bright, green stream of a grandmother's prayer touch his mind. I saw a man driving home who decided to turn down a different street for no clear reason, and a soft purple stream of someone's prayer had gently influenced his thought. I even saw how prayers affected cells, encouraging healing and resistance in a child's immune system. This, Gabriel said, is how prayer enters creation. It does not always create miracles in the way people expect, but it always creates movement. The streams didn't just go upward toward God and stop. They went out in all directions, into thoughts, bodies, timing, decisions, and even nature. Prayer was not a request. It was a force, a thread in the fabric of life. I asked Gabriel, "So does God need us to pray before he acts?" He shook his head gently, and his answer filled me with awe. God is always working, but prayer allows you to participate in that work. It is not about giving God permission. It is about opening your heart to join him. When you pray, you are not changing God's mind, you are stepping into his movement. That truth hit me deeply. I realized that prayer was not begging. It was partnering. It wasn't about changing outcomes by force. It was about being invited to take part in shaping what could be, in harmony with love and divine wisdom. Gabriel then said, "The Creator has woven prayer into the laws of the universe. It is not a ritual. It is a spiritual technology. It activates possibility, aligns intention, and invites transformation. Every prayer offered in faith becomes part of the ongoing creation of reality." I felt humbled. All those times I had mumbled half-hearted prayers before bed or said routine grace before meals without really meaning it. They had been so small, so dim in this greater picture. But the few times I had cried out from my heart, full of love or desperation, those had mattered. I saw my own prayers. Some were strong, others weak. I could even see the difference between when I had prayed selfishly and when I had truly cared about someone else. It was all recorded in this place. And the most beautiful thing? Even the weakest prayers hadn't been discarded. They just hadn't reached as far. Gabriel said gently, "When you pray with love and alignment, your prayer becomes a key that unlocks what was closed." That line stayed with me. I felt like I had been given a key to understanding not just prayer, but life itself. I now knew what I had never known before. We remained in the control room a little longer, and I continued to watch as new prayers appeared every moment, fresh beams of light entering the space from Earth. Some came from hospital rooms, others from jail cells, churches, cars, and bedrooms. They came in different languages, from people of different ages and beliefs, but each one, if offered with sincerity, had weight. It moved something. It added to the living design. I watched a lonely child praying for comfort. I watched an old man praying for peace as he lay dying. I watched a young woman praying in silence with no words, only tears. And each of those prayers made ripples, subtle, yet powerful. It was like watching rain fall into a calm lake. The ripples went out and out, touching more than they could ever know. I realized then that no prayer is ever too small. Even the quietest cry from the heart matters in the great design. Finally, Gabriel said, "You have seen what many never do. You now understand that prayer is not just speaking. It is co-creating. Every human being is invited to become a thread in the divine tapestry through prayer." I stood there, speechless, as the meaning of what I'd seen settled in my spirit. I had entered that realm thinking prayer was just a way to ask for help. I now saw that prayer was a way to join with God in shaping what is and what will be. It wasn't just a habit. It was an invitation. And the more people understood this, the more healing, peace, and love could enter the world. I knew then that if I ever returned to Earth, I would never pray the same way again. Not because I learned new words, but because I now understood the power, the beauty, and the purpose of every sincere prayer. After I had seen how prayers moved and took shape in the realm of light, Gabriel gently turned my attention to specific examples. That is, real situations on Earth where prayers had made an immediate and visible impact. These were not general lessons, but clear, living cases of how faith could move things in the real world. The first was a prayer from a mother in Nigeria. Her child, a little boy named Samuel, had been suffering from a high fever and breathing difficulty. Medical help was limited where she lived. As she sat beside him, she began to pray, not out of panic, but with quiet trust, whispering her request to God through tears. In the control room, I watched as her prayer became a vibrant green and gold light that traveled across space, reaching a young doctor in a nearby clinic who suddenly remembered an old treatment method he had studied but never used before. That moment saved the boy's life. It wasn't just the doctor's memory that shifted. I saw the child's body respond. His immune system received strength as the green stream of light entered him, touching the very cells in his lungs. It was like watching medicine made of faith reach places even science couldn't touch. Gabriel explained, "This is what happens when prayer, belief, and love combine." The mother didn't just ask, she released a force. Her prayer not only affected the child and the doctor, but rippled outward. A neighbor who had once ignored the family showed up hours later with medicine and food. A nurse at the clinic felt led to stay late that evening and monitor the child's breathing. Every action, every shift had been triggered by a single mother's heartfelt prayer. Gabriel said, "One prayer, when rooted in real love, can start a chain reaction far greater than anyone expects." I was stunned by how invisible acts of faith could reshape entire days. Next, Gabriel turned my focus to Spain, to an office building where a middle-aged man named Carlos sat alone after hours. His company, a mid-sized manufacturing firm, was days away from bankruptcy. Orders had slowed, the books were bleeding, and the board had already started preparing closure plans without telling the staff. Carlos was just a staff member, not a manager or decision-maker. But that night, after everyone left, he stayed at his desk and prayed. No grand words, just quiet, sincere pleading for mercy, for provision, for a turnaround. He prayed not just for himself, but for the dozens of workers who would lose their jobs. His prayer came into the spiritual control room as a strong blue and purple stream, part healing, part guidance. I saw how his words touched the hearts of people far above him in the company who didn't even know he had prayed. The next morning, strange things began to happen. A long-lost client reached out to place a large order. A delayed payment from a major retailer suddenly cleared. The bank, which had planned to deny an extension, had a shift in decision due to one of their staff who that same morning had read a message about compassion and second chances and was moved to suggest a different approach. I saw how Carlos's prayer worked like invisible threads pulling these separate events together. His CEO never knew what truly changed things. The staff celebrated this sudden breakthrough as good fortune. But I had seen the root. It was the sincere cry of a man who believed, even when he had no power. Gabriel said, "Sometimes those in the lowest positions carry the greatest spiritual influence. Their prayers are unnoticed by men, but recognized by heaven." Carlos didn't become rich or famous, but his prayer saved families, preserved jobs, and realigned destinies without anyone ever knowing it was him. Gabriel then showed me different types of prayer energy, each with its own purpose and shape. The prayers for healing looked like green vines of light that grew, wrapped, and repaired. I saw one enter a hospital room and gently touch the cells of a man's heart as he recovered from surgery. The prayers for guidance were like violet arrows, moving through confusion and clearing mental fog. In one scene, a woman standing at a crossroads in her career received a thought, a quiet nudge that helped her take a bold but right step. The prayers of gratitude were stunning golden waves that flowed outward and wrapped around people and places, increasing the good already present. I watched as a grandmother gave thanks after receiving news that her tests came back clear. Her gratitude rippled out and reached her daughter's home, filling the atmosphere with peace and lifting the weight of stress from her anxious teenage grandson. Gratitude, I learned, carries creative power. One of the most breathtaking scenes came next. Gabriel showed me how collective prayer worked. We watched a group of women in a rural town gather under a small shelter during a heavy rainstorm. Their friend had gone missing in the woods during a hike, and there was no sign of her. As they held hands and prayed, their individual prayers began rising into the control room, some shaky, others firm, but all rooted in concern and unity. As they continued praying, the streams joined, forming a single large wave of silver and white light. The force of that combined prayer was stronger than anything I had seen so far. It moved quickly, searching. I followed the light and saw it touch the mind of a search party leader, urging him to try one more path. That final decision led to the girl being found, cold but alive. Together, Gabriel said, they did what no single prayer could do alone. Then came the most powerful vision of all. Gabriel led me to view a conflict zone where violence and hate had ruled for years. I could feel the heaviness in that place, a spiritual weight, like fear and anger soaked into the soil. But above it, I saw something astonishing. There was a network of golden white streams, mostly prayers for peace, for safety, for forgiveness that were sent by people around the world who had never set foot there. Some were praying from churches, some were children, some had no connection except love for humanity. Together, their prayers formed a web of light, stronger than the fear and hate. The energy began to affect individuals on the ground. A rebel commander had a sudden change of heart and told his men to stand down. A teacher began secretly organizing lessons of unity among youth. The shift didn't come from laws or politics. It came from the power of united prayer that touched the roots of the conflict. Gabriel explained, when prayer becomes united, not just in timing, but in spirit, it magnifies. It creates resonance. It opens doors that logic alone cannot. It changes not just people, but atmospheres. I watched how the energy of these prayers softened hearts, calmed minds, and reconnected people to their conscience. These were not just small effects. They were deep and lasting. The conflict didn't disappear overnight, but something had started to heal, not through weapons or debates, but through a spiritual shift. And I knew then why Gabriel had brought me here. It wasn't just to teach me what prayer looked like, it was to show me what prayer did. I could no longer think of it as just hope in the dark. It was clearly light in motion, transforming lives, turning thoughts, realigning events, and holding back destruction in ways invisible to human eyes. I had seen it with my own spirit, and I would never forget. As we left that vision, I felt changed. The stories Gabriel showed me weren't just impressive, they were personal. They reminded me that every time someone thinks their prayer is small or ignored, something larger is actually happening. A whisper on earth could stir motion in heaven. A tear could trigger healing miles away. A moment of belief could unlock miracles for someone you've never met. And most of the time, we never even see the results, but that doesn't mean they don't exist. Gabriel looked at me and said, prayer is one of the highest ways the human heart can love. It reaches beyond space, time, and language. It is the connection that binds the physical world to the spiritual one. As he spoke, I realized how little we understand what we're doing when we pray. We think we're speaking into silence, but in truth, we are activating movement in a living system of grace. And so I stood in the quiet of that eternal space, reflecting on everything I had just seen. From the mother in Nigeria to the office worker in Spain, from a missing girl found through unity. to a war zone touched by distant prayers, I had witnessed what I once thought impossible. Prayer was not weak. It was not symbolic. It was not just spiritual comfort. It was a living power, full of intelligence, intention, and purpose. I knew then that when I returned to Earth, I couldn't keep this to myself. People had to know. Those who had stopped praying out of disappointment or doubt needed to be reminded of what their prayers still do. Those who had never believed in prayer needed to be shown that it is real, measurable, and incredibly powerful. And those who had grown weary needed to be encouraged again, because their faith is building something they may not yet see. Gabriel gently turned my attention to another part of the realm, one that looked different. The streams of light here were not bright or strong. Many were dim, scattered, and unstable. Some barely moved at all, like flickers struggling to stay alive. This area felt quieter, but also heavier, almost as if the light here had to fight its way through thick air. These, Gabriel said, are prayers without strength, not because God ignored them, but because the heart behind them lacked true connection. I watched as some of these dim prayers vanished before reaching anywhere. Others twisted and faded after only a short distance. Unlike the powerful, focused streams I had seen earlier, these were weak. They didn't have the force to create change. I felt a deep sadness, not because they were rejected, but because they had been offered without real faith or understanding. Gabriel explained that many people pray with their lips, but not with their hearts. These are the prayers that come from habit or pressure, said quickly, without thought. Some were prayers spoken out of fear, but without belief. Others were focused only on personal gain, with no concern for others or alignment with God's purpose. I saw how such prayers lacked direction, floating without purpose. Gabriel said, "Faith is not about being perfect. It's about trusting deeply, even when the answer isn't clear. Prayers spoken in fear can still be powerful if they're honest and trusting. But when words are empty or selfish, their energy weakens." I began to understand why some prayers seemed to go unanswered, not because God didn't care, but because they weren't rooted in trust, love, or purpose. Just like a seed planted without water, they never had a chance to grow. The energy they released was too scattered to create movement in the spiritual realm. Then Gabriel showed me what strong, effective prayers looked like again, not just their form, but their foundation. These prayers were spoken in humility, not pride. They came from people who weren't demanding answers, but opening their hearts. They were filled with love, not just for themselves, but for others. I saw prayers that focused on interceding for someone else, prayers offered for sick children, struggling friends, even strangers. These were bright, focused, and powerful. Effective prayer, Gabriel said, doesn't come from special words. It comes from alignment with truth, with compassion, with God's will. When someone prays with genuine love and trust, their prayer moves like a river. I also noticed that the most powerful prayers were simple. They didn't need long speeches or perfect grammar. Some were just tears. Some were whispered words like, "Help me," or "Please heal them." But those simple prayers, when said with deep sincerity, carried more force than the longest, most elegant ones said without belief. Then came a moment I will never forget. Gabriel turned toward me and said, "Now it's time you see your own prayers." I felt nervous, not because I feared judgment, but because I knew I had often prayed without understanding. Before me, a series of lights began to appear, each representing a prayer I had spoken during my life. I saw some of them burn brightly, especially those I had said for others in moments of love or pain. I remembered praying for my father when he was in surgery. I remembered crying out to God for a patient in the ICU who wasn't expected to survive. These prayers were beautiful, glowing with purpose. But then I saw others that barely moved. I mean prayers I had said quickly before meals without thinking, or the ones I whispered during stress but without real hope. Gabriel didn't scold me. He simply said, "Now you understand what your spirit already knew." That experience changed how I thought of prayer forever. I realized that even the prayers I thought had done nothing had still left a mark, and the ones I had prayed from a deep place of love had actually shaped real events, though I had never connected the outcome to my words. Seeing my own spiritual history made me feel both humbled and encouraged. I wasn't being shamed. I was being shown how to grow. Gabriel said, "You are not being judged for what you did not know. You are being invited to pray differently now that you do know." That moment filled me with new purpose. I knew that if I returned to earth, I would never treat prayer as a habit again. I would pray with attention, with love, and with real trust, because now I had seen the difference. Some prayers change nothing, but others shape reality in ways far greater than we can see. After I had witnessed the truth about weak and strong prayers, Gabriel turned to me with a more focused tone. "Now," he said, "you will see how prayer works when time is short and need is great." Instantly, the space around us shifted again, and I found myself in what he described as the spiritual emergency room. The moment I entered, I could feel an urgency unlike anything I had felt before in the other places. It wasn't panic, but intensity, speed, and motion. Here, everything was in real time. Streams of prayer light moved rapidly across the space, targeting moments of danger, illness, and loss. It was like a central hub for emergency intervention from the unseen realm. Gabriel explained that this part of the spiritual dimension was especially active when people cried out in deep distress, especially during accidents, surgeries, disasters, and times when life hung by a thread. This was where many of the most intense prayers were handled. I looked around and saw beams of light moving quickly to places on Earth, in hospitals, crash scenes, homes where someone was slipping away. The prayers in this place were different. They moved faster with a higher energy, almost vibrating as they rushed to their destinations. Some carried healing, others carried comfort, and some simply provided protection. As I watched, Gabriel brought my attention to one area glowing more brightly than the others. "This," he said, "is your situation." What I saw next took my breath away. There I was. My body was lying on an operating table in the emergency room of the Greenville hospital. Doctors and nurses worked frantically around me. Machines beeped, hands moved quickly, and there was a deep seriousness in the air. But surrounding my body was something no one in that room could see. A glowing shield of prayer energy made of soft white and golden light, stretching outward in waves like a living, breathing cocoon. I watched as the source of those glowing waves came into view. Prayers from my mother, my co-workers, even friends from church I hadn't spoken to in weeks. One nurse I barely knew had stepped into the hallway and quietly asked God to help me. Even strangers who saw the accident on the news said short prayers as they got into bed. Each of these prayers had found me. Together they formed a field of spiritual support that wrapped around my weak body like a second skin. I could see the prayers touch the hands of the doctors, giving them steadiness. I saw how the decision to continue CPR for just a few more seconds came from a subtle prompting, a silent influence delivered through those prayers. Gabriel looked at me and said, "When people pray in crisis, their hearts are more open. The urgency pushes their souls into direct connection. And when faith and love are strong, the response is immediate." That moment was deeply emotional for me. I had always assumed that when people prayed in a crisis, it was more for comfort than for any real result. But what I was seeing proved otherwise. In this spiritual emergency room, Crisis prayers were prioritized, not because they were louder or longer, but because they were intense and pure. Gabriel said, "Heaven responds to sincerity. There are no delays, no waiting lines when the heart is crying out in full truth." I could see the structure of how the prayers were processed. They weren't being judged like paperwork. They were being recognized like a call for help being received by someone who had already been listening. I also noticed that some prayers acted as bridges, joining the spiritual realm and the physical world instantly, without needing time to build up. In those moments, I felt a deep appreciation for every person who had ever whispered, "Please God, help them," even for someone they didn't know. After I had seen how crisis prayers were handled, Gabriel led me into another space, one that felt timeless. He called it the prayer repository, and it was unlike anything I had seen so far. This was not a room, but a living archive, a spiritual library filled with glowing strands of prayer energy. These were not prayers currently being spoken. These were prayers from the past, and yet they were still active. They pulsed gently, as if alive, continuing to release influence even years or centuries after they had first been spoken. Gabriel explained, "No sincere prayer is ever lost. Every prayer offered in faith becomes part of the spiritual record, and that record continues to influence reality." I walked through this space in awe, realizing that I was surrounded by millions, maybe billions, of prayers that had been whispered through time. Some were ancient, others were recent, but all still carried energy and effect. Then Gabriel directed my attention to a very specific thread of prayer light. It glowed softly and carried a warmth that felt strangely familiar. "This," he said, "was spoken by your great-grandmother before you were even born." I watched as a woman I had only heard stories about knelt beside her bed, praying for the future of her family, for descendants she would never meet. Her prayer had included a request that her children's children would walk in protection, purpose, and peace. That prayer had followed me my whole life, and I hadn't known. I could now trace moments where I had felt sudden clarity, unusual protection, or direction that made no logical sense. These weren't accidents. They were echoes of her prayer, still shaping my steps. Gabriel explained, "Time does not limit prayer. It flows backward and forward. What is said in love never dies. It travels, waits, and activates at the right moment." That truth overwhelmed me with gratitude. Then, just as gently, Gabriel showed me another scene. This one was not from the past, but from a possible future. It was a moment I had not lived yet, but would one day face. I saw myself sitting quietly, hands folded, praying for someone else, not a family member, but a child in another country I would never meet. The prayer I offered in that future moment became a thread that touched events I could never predict. It delayed an accident. It encouraged someone at the right time. It opened a door. Gabriel said, "You do not need to see the result for it to be real. Your prayer, spoken in the future, is already part of the spiritual equation." This understanding changed my entire view of what it means to pray. It was no longer about seeing something happen right now. It was about knowing that each prayer plants something real, something that exists outside the timeline I'm used to. I now realized that the prayer repository was not just a memory bank. It was a living system of ongoing influence. Some prayers had been waiting decades for the right moment. Others had acted immediately, but all of them had been recorded, held, and used with divine timing. I saw prayers offered during war that were still protecting communities today. I saw prayers from people long forgotten by history, whose words were still shaping lives through quiet miracles. Gabriel told me, "You humans are often too focused on immediate results, but God sees the whole path. He stores what you offer, and He releases it when it can do the most good. That insight gave me peace. It meant that no tear I'd ever cried in prayer was wasted. No heartfelt whisper had vanished. Even if I never saw the results, I now knew they continued working in ways far beyond what I could imagine. Gabriel allowed me to observe the way time folded around prayer. From that space, I could see how a prayer offered at 7 a.m. in one country could influence something that happened days earlier in another part of the world. I couldn't explain it in human language, but I understood it with my spirit. Prayer existed outside of time, operating by a different law, one where love was the language and faith was the fuel. Past, present, and future were not barriers, they were platforms. When someone prays, their words become seeds that God can plant wherever and whenever He chooses. I watched as some prayers went straight into action. Others hovered, waiting for a person's heart to change before they could land. Still others waited until the right generation came along. "You see now," Gabriel said, "why even small prayers from humble people are sacred. They live longer than the one who speaks them, and they shape more than anyone ever sees." Standing in the center of that truth, I finally felt something settle in my soul. All the times I had questioned whether God heard me, all the nights I had wondered if I was praying wrong, all the disappointment I had carried when things didn't happen the way I asked. Suddenly, it made sense. It wasn't that my prayers had failed. It was that they had entered a larger plan. Some were working behind the scenes. Others had been redirected for a better purpose. And some were still waiting for the right moment to be released. Gabriel said softly, "Faith is not measured by results. It's measured by trust. And trust means believing that what you offered in love will be used in love, even when you don't see it." I held on to that truth with everything in me. I no longer saw prayer as a one-time request. I saw it as a living contribution to eternity. As the final moments of my time in the spiritual realm approached, I could feel something shifting. The peace I had been wrapped in so fully began to loosen. I looked at Gabriel, and even though no words were spoken, I understood. It was time to return. My work there was not finished, but my place, at least for now, was back on Earth. I didn't want to leave. Every part of me longed to stay in that place of clarity and light, where everything made sense and where love was constant. But I could also feel that something important had been placed inside me, and it wasn't meant to remain hidden. Gabriel gave me one last look, filled with strength and kindness, then said, "Tell them their prayers matter more than they know. Tell them prayer is not just asking, it is joining. Remind them they are part of the creation itself." And with that, everything shifted. In an instant, I was back in my body. The first thing I remember was a deep, gasping breath that startled the entire room. My eyes flew open, and I heard someone shout, "She's back." The medical staff in the emergency room looked stunned. One nurse dropped the chart she was holding. A doctor stepped back in disbelief, blinking as if he wasn't sure what he was seeing. They had already begun preparing to declare the time of death. But somehow, without explanation, my heart had started again. Machines that had been flatlined began to beep. My blood pressure slowly rose. My breathing stabilized. No one could explain it. One of the nurses whispered, "It's a miracle," and it was. But not just the miracle of my return, it was the miracle of all the prayers that had surrounded me, shielded me, and helped pull me back. I had been carried through by something greater than science or skill. In the days and weeks that followed, I began to recover. Physically, my body healed slowly. Emotionally, however, everything had changed. The world felt different. People spoke the same, the news still buzzed with noise, and life rushed on as before, but I was not the same woman. What had been shown to me in that realm lived inside me now. Every time I closed my eyes, I could still see the streams of light, feel the movement of sincere prayers, and sense the gentle hum of divine order that most people never notice. I knew I had returned with a purpose, not just to go on living, but to help others understand what I had seen. I wasn't a preacher, I wasn't a prophet, but I was a witness. And I had been shown that prayer was not just a tool for surviving hardship. It was a way to co-create reality, a sacred act of partnership with the divine. My entire understanding of prayer transformed. I no longer saw it as a last resort or a routine. I saw it as living participation in how life unfolds. When I prayed now, I didn't just say words. I visualized the light. I imagined the energy flowing out, touching people, healing situations, softening hearts. I prayed with purpose and direction, knowing that what I was sending was real and effective. At the hospital, I began to pray for patients, not just silently, but intentionally. I would pause and see their bodies surrounded by the healing green energy I had witnessed. When families came in anxious and broken, I didn't just offer polite comfort. I prayed that purple guidance streams would clear their minds and calm their fears. The results were undeniable. Recoveries happened faster than expected. Peace settled where there had been tension. I didn't talk much about my experience at first. The change in me was visible. Eventually, people started asking questions. Friends noticed how focused I had become. Co-workers noticed how calm I remained in stressful situations. One day, a nurse I worked with pulled me aside and said, "You're different." Something happened, didn't it? That opened the door. Slowly, I began sharing my story. Not with dramatic language or exaggerated details, but simply honestly. I told them what I saw. I described the light, the movement, the presence of Gabriel, and the purpose of prayer. Some people listened with wide eyes and open hearts. Others nodded politely but clearly didn't believe me. A few quietly avoided me afterward. That was hard. I didn't enjoy being doubted or treated like I was imagining things, but I understood. If it hadn't happened to me, I might have reacted the same way. What mattered was not whether they believed me, it was whether they began to take prayer more seriously. That was my real mission. Over time, I felt led to start something simple, a small prayer group in my home. At first, it was just a few women from work and church. We didn't make it complicated. We gathered weekly, shared needs, and prayed intentionally, focusing on alignment with God's will, speaking from a place of faith and love. I taught them how to visualize healing, how to pray not just with words, but with heart. We focused on praying for others, not just ourselves. As weeks turned into months, we began to see real changes. People we prayed for got jobs after long seasons of unemployment. Sick relatives recovered. Marriages that were falling apart began to heal. These weren't always dramatic, instant results, but they were consistent, deep, and lasting. The group grew, and others started similar gatherings in their homes. I realized I wasn't just sharing a story. I was helping people rediscover the purpose of prayer. Not everyone accepted it. Some people said I was being too mystical. Others accused me of turning prayer into a science. One man even told me, "Prayer isn't about energy, it's about obedience." I listened respectfully, but I knew what I had seen. I wasn't inventing anything. I had witnessed the spiritual reality behind what so many take for granted. And what I now understood was that prayer wasn't just obedience, it was invitation. It was a way to align with something bigger than ourselves and contribute to it with intention. The results around me kept confirming what Gabriel had shown me. I saw people who had given up on prayer begin to try again. I saw elderly women find renewed purpose. I saw young people, once skeptical, start their own daily prayer time. using what they learned to cover their friends and families in light. Whether they believed my story or not, something had been awakened in them. One night, as I sat alone after a long day, I felt drawn to step outside. The sky was clear, stars covering the darkness like diamonds on velvet. I closed my eyes and breathed in the quiet. And just then, I was given one final vision, gentle but overwhelming. I saw the earth floating gently in space, wrapped in strands of light, streams of prayer coming from every country, every city, every quiet home. These lights crossed over oceans, deserts, and battlefields. They came from voices old and young, rich and poor, spoken in many languages, some in whispers, some in cries. Together they formed a beautiful web of sincere prayers, glowing like a net of hope and love that held the world together. I saw how that web pushed back chaos, softened storms, and held back destruction. It wasn't perfect. There were gaps. But the more people prayed with faith and unity, the stronger that web became. I knew then, without Gabriel needing to appear again, that this vision was his final message to me. It was a reminder, a confirmation, and a charge. Tell them their prayers matter more than they know. Those words echoed in my heart, over and over. Not some prayers, not big prayers, all sincere prayers. I understood that every time someone stops to pray, out of gratitude, concern, love, or even fear, they are participating in something far beyond themselves. They are strengthening the web. They are keeping darkness from spreading. They are giving light a path to travel. That vision filled me with joy, but also with a deep sense of responsibility. I had to share it, not because I wanted attention, but because the world needed to know. People needed to believe again that their words matter, their faith creates movement, and their love creates change, even if they never see the full results. Today, I continue to share my testimony. I write, I speak, and I pray with others, not because I have all the answers, but because I have seen. I have seen what prayer really does. I have felt what happens when people pray in unity. I have watched ordinary words become powerful forces. I no longer see prayer as optional. It is essential because it is the heartbeat of spiritual reality. I have committed my life to helping others understand that prayer is not just something we do when we're desperate. It is something we do because we are part of something divine. When we pray, we don't just speak, we build, we shape, we heal, we lift, we join God in His work. That is our privilege and our calling. And no matter who you are, where you come from, your prayers are needed. They are real, they are heard, and they are making more difference than you know.